Here's the problem that we're going to solve in this video. You've got a radio like this one, and it's running the EdgeTX operating system, and you've been learning about all the different features and options of EdgeTX, all the things you can configure in that radio. But what if you want to use that radio with more than one vehicle? Maybe you've got a multi-rotor and an airplane, and heck, maybe you've got a ground vehicle like a boat or a car. The settings for one of those vehicles are not the same as the settings for the rest of those vehicles. And obviously, you're not going to sit there and reconfigure the whole freaking radio every time you want to fly a different vehicle. And you're not going to buy a bunch of different radios, one for each vehicle. Surely not. No, you don't have to do that. These radios, EdgeTX, has the ability to keep sets of settings in what's called models. And today we're going to learn about the model management features of EdgeTX that let you use a single radio with more than one vehicle. And before we get into that content, you should know that this video is part of a series where I go through a whole bunch of information about EdgeTX, the operating system that runs on our radios, to try and teach people more about it. A lot of people know the basics of using it, just enough to get by on a day-to-day basis, but they don't know, like, when you go through all these menus, like, what do they do? And how do you get the radio to do what you really want it to do? That's what this video series is about. And there's a whole playlist. I want to invite you, after you finish this video, to check out that playlist. It's got a whole bunch of information about EdgeTX and will make you a whole lot smarter about how to use your radio. That's linked in the video description below when you get to the end of this one. In many parts of EdgeTX, the black and white screen radio and the color touchscreen radio have almost identical options, and the only difference between them is largely cosmetic. You have prettier, more spread out screens on the colors touchscreen radio, and of course it is a touchscreen, so you can manipulate it that way. Whereas on the black and white screen radio, everything is more compact and text-based, but the underlying structure of the menus, the features that are there, are basically the same. That is actually not true today. In the model management features, the color touchscreen radios have a bunch of features that the black and white screen radios don't. So what I'm going to do is start the video with the black and white screen radio and introduce the general concept of model management, and then you're basically going to know everything you need to know. And then we're going to go to the touchscreen radio and see all the additional stuff that the touchscreen radios can do. And those of you who have a black and white screen radio, this will be the first time where maybe you'll be a little bit jealous. There's something you're missing out on. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to take you through these screens. And we've got the setup screen. That's the model setup screen. We've got the flight modes. We haven't seen that screen yet. We will. We've got inputs, mixes, and outputs, which we have seen previously in this video. And we've got curves, logical switches, special functions. We'll get to these, don't worry. Telemetry, and so forth. All of the things that you see, all of these screens that appear when we hit the model key, all of those screens are stored as part of a single model. And that means that all of the configuration that you do in those screens is going to be saved and preserved. And when you switch models, all of that stuff is going to change. So the first thing that I want you to take away from this is, like, what's part of a model and what's not. And what's not part of a model is, if I press the Sys key here and go to the Tools menu, those tools that you see here, those are on my SD card. And those tools are going to be the same no matter what model I've got loaded. If I page to the SD card contents, here we're just literally looking at the SD card contents like we opened up a file explorer. That's obviously not model specific. If we go to radio setup, these radio setup options are universal to the radio. Those are not a part of the model. If we go to global functions are global to the radio and are going to be the same regardless of which model is loaded. Trainer, we haven't even looked at trainer mode. That's going to be universal. All the settings here are universal no matter what model we've got loaded. The hardware screen, that relates to the switches and knobs and hardware of the radio, and that's universal. None of these settings are affected by what model you have loaded, and so on. So to sum that up, what we could say is that when we press the Sys key, all of that stuff is radio specific and is global and is independent of the model that we've got loaded. But when we press the model key, all of that stuff is model specific and depends on what model we have loaded. So then how do we load a model? And we do that by pressing the model key, and that will take us to the model select screen. And here we can see all of the different models that I have set up on this radio. And if I scroll down, I can see that I can have as many as, wow, that's a lot of models. How many models am I allowed to have? Oh, there it was. That was the end. It looks like 60 models. I don't know if that's the same for every radio. You can have a ton of models. And you may think, well, I have more than 60 aircraft. I have a problem. Don't tell my wife. You don't need one model for every single aircraft that you're going to fly. For example, here I've got a little tiny whoop, right? Here I've got another little tiny whoop. Here I've got another little tiny whoop. I've got 3 tiny whoops here. I don't need a separate model to fly all of these tiny whoops, because here's the thing. Think about what's in the configuration options. I've got things like channel endpoints. I've got things like aux modes. I've got things like my channel mapping. These are all things we've talked about in previous videos, so I'm not going to go into detail. If you're like, what are those things, then you should watch the earlier videos in the playlist and understand what they are. All of those things are the same for all of these aircraft. I'm going to go into the flight controller. These are all running beta flight. They all are set up identical. They have the same aux modes. They have the same channel mapping. They all have an Express LRS receiver. All of the settings are identical. And that means that I do not need a separate model to fly each of these 3 aircraft. And in fact, that's how I've got it set up. Whichever one of these aircraft I plug in, it'll connect to the controller. I'll have the same model loaded, and the settings will all be correct. So if you look at the actual models that I've got set up on this radio, they're differentiated by which RC link I'm using. There's one model here for all of my aircraft that are using Express LRS. There's a model here for my aircraft that are using Crossfire. There's a model here for my aircraft that are using Immersion RC Ghost. I don't have very many of those, and probably some of the people watching this don't even know what that is. There's one model here for my ArduPilot aircrafts. Now, this is a different thing. My ArduPilot aircrafts use Express LRS. But because my Express LRS aircrafts all use Betaflight and iNav, and those are similar enough that all the settings are the same, they can be under one model. When we come over to ArduPilot, I only actually have one ArduPilot aircraft right now, and it runs Express LRS. So I have a model for that, and ArduPilot is distinct enough that some of those settings need to be different, and that's why it's a distinct model. So as you think about what models you do and don't need, the way that I would encourage you to think about it is you start with one model. Here it is. This is my first tiny whoop. It runs Express LRS and it runs Betaflight, and I create a model for that. And when I get a second aircraft, I'm going to ask myself, can I just use the same model? Here's a second aircraft. It runs Express LRS. It's got a Betaflight flight controller. I look through all the configurations there, and I set the aircraft up, and yeah, everything works fine. I don't need a second model for that. Everything is identical. But when I run into a situation where I'm going to set up a model and I need to make some change in those screens, I need to change the model setup, the mixes, the outputs, the inputs, all of those screens, and that change is unique to that model, that's when I would make a new model, and I would need to come up with like a descriptive name that tells me, what that is for. So here we've got a bunch of models, and I think what I'd like to do first is just show you how to create a new model. And I'm going to do that by going down to a blank slot, any blank slot. They don't have to be contiguous. I can do it anywhere. And if I click the jog wheel, I have the option Create Model, and that'll create a new blank model. It's named Model 10. And if you look next to the model, you'll see a little star right here, and that's telling me that model is the currently loaded model. So it created the model and it loaded it. And now if I press the page key to go through the screens, you'll see that here are the default inputs, which are the same as what I set up. But if we look at the mixes, we've got none of the mixes that I set up. All of the switches that I previously set up on channels 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so forth in a previous video, they're not there. This is all default stuff. All of my outputs and my endpoints that I did in a previous video, that's not there. Everything is defaulted and everything is basically just sort of wiped clean. I need to start from scratch. What if I don't want to start from scratch? Like, for example, what if I've got a new tiny whoop and the configuration is almost the same as before, but I just want to make one little tweak. I want to play with something, maybe make some custom setting. Well, then what I can do is I can duplicate an existing model. So again, I'll press the model key, and I will, let me just select my Express LRS model, and then I can say copy model. I can copy it, and then if I scroll down, I can pick a slot, and I can make a new copy of that model in a new slot. Interestingly, it did not select that model. You see there's no star next to it. So what let's do is let's select that model, and now we've loaded that model in. And frankly, the first thing I would do is I would page to the model setup screen. It just says setup here, but this is the model setup screen. And I would change that model name. And actually, now's as good a time as any to show you how the keyboard works on a black and white screen radio. There is no keyboard. What we're going to do is we're going to click the jog wheel, and we're going to be able to select a letter by rolling the jog wheel. This is really cumbersome. And when I click, it'll go to the next letter. If I want to make uppercase and lowercase, what I'm going to do is I'm going to long press the jog wheel, and it will switch between uppercase and lowercase. Notice that it also moved to the next letter. If I want to go back, I don't think there's a way to go back. I just have to hit return, click the jog wheel, and then click to get to the letter that I wanted to modify. Let's make that uppercase ELRS, and then a space, and then let's name this ELRS copy. C-O. Now a long press to make this lowercase, and now the letters will stay lowercase from here on out unless I switch back to uppercase. No! I was so sure they would stay lowercase. See, okay, long press, C-O-P. I really thought they stayed lowercase. Oh well, can't be right all the time. TVWXY copy. Okay, so now I've created a model named ELRS copy. And then if I press model, there it is. There in the model select menu. Other options that appear in that menu are Move Model, which just lets me move the model up and down in the list to rearrange the list. And you can see that if I move it into a position that another model currently occupies, the other model gets pushed down. So I can just rearrange my list any way that makes sense to me. And then there is another option, Backup Model. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a file on your SD card, which is a backup of this current model. So if I hit Backup Model here, well, it doesn't look like anything happened. But I can actually go, if I long press the sys key and page to the SD card, then in the backup folder, sorry about that, there are these files ending in the .yml extension, and they are the backups. You can see this one named ELRS copy, and there's a date, although the date is wrong because the real-time clock on my radio is not set correctly. But you can see here ELRS copy, that's the name of that model. And if I then go to the model select screen, if I were to, let's just select a different model real quick, and let's just delete these models that I'm not using. Delete. If I select a slot and do restore model, it will load that model from the SD card. And that's really handy because, like, when I've got a model that's set up exactly how I want it to be, I'll just make a little backup on the SD card real quick. Because then if later I'm screwing around and I make some change and break something, I can just restore it, and I know I've got it back in a state where I want it to be. It's also a way that you can move models between radios, and it's not the only way to move models between radios, but if you just back up a model and then take the SD card and copy that YML file off the SD card and put it on another radio in the backup folder, you can restore that model. Now, it has to be the same type of radio. You can't restore a model from a Boxer onto a TX16S because the switch layout and stuff isn't the same. But if you've got two Boxer radios, you can move a model between them, two identical radios, using the backup and restore function. So if I restore here, boom, there's that model put right back where we had it. So that is model management on the black and white screen radio, and that's really all there is to say about it. Now let's take a look at the touchscreen radio and see some additional features. To access the model management screen on the T15, we long press the menu key. That brings up the model management button. We can also tap on the touchscreen, and there is a Manage Models option there. And many of the concepts that we saw in the black and white screen radio are going to transfer over. So for example, we've got some models here, Model 1 and Model 2. And if I long press on one of the models, we have the option to duplicate the model. That works exactly as before. Delete the model. That works exactly as before. But there are some additional things here. One of the additional things is Label Model. So if I hit Label Model here, you'll see that there's only one label currently created, and it's Favorites. I could tag this model as one of my favorites, and we see the checkbox appear here. And then if I tap Favorites on the left side, I'll see only that model. If I hit the New button in the upper right and hit New Label, I can actually create a new label using the keyboard. So let's name this one Drones. I know drone is a dirty word, but that's a nice short word to type. And save, and let's make a new label, and let's name this one planes. And we'll save that. And so then I can go to unlabeled, favorites. We could label model 1 as a favorite and a drone. We could label model 2 as a plane and not a favorite. I don't know. And then as I go through these tags over here on the left, they're like kind of like folders. I've got favorites, I've got drones, and I've got planes, right? Oh, look at that. It's doing, do you see it says and there? I didn't realize. Oh, that's so clever. It's doing and logic. So here I'm saying, show me everything that is a favorite and a drone. Wow, that's new. I didn't know that. What I need to do is tap to deselect. If I want to see only drones, then I tap just drones. And then if I want to see only planes, I deselect drones and hit planes. Because if I hit planes and then drones, it shows me everything that's a drone and a plane, and nothing matches that. So these are tags, basically, not really folders. And I can tag all my models in any arbitrary way that I want to make up to help me see which models I'm going to load. That's pretty slick. Another thing I can do with these models is save as template. So if I take this model and save it as a template, and we'll just save as template, model 01. Okay, fine. We maybe could have given it a more descriptive name before we saved it as a template. Then when I hit new model, I get the option to select between a bunch of templates. So on the black and white screen radio, when I created a new model, I just got a new blank model, period. And that's the only choice I had. But here I can create a new blank model, or I can create something based on these templates. And the templates can also have folders. So where's that new Model 01 template that I created? It's here in the personal folder. And if I hit personal, I can create, basically what I've done is I've just created a copy of Model 01. So I could have just duplicated Model 01. But my point is that you can create this template, and then you could take Model 01 and you can go do whatever you want to it. But later you can come back and you can create a new copy of Model 01 off of that template. That's pretty cool. When you're creating a new model, you also have the option to select wizard, and this is a setup wizard for the new model. I'll select whether this is a glider, a multi-rotor, or a plane. Let's say plane, and then it'll launch this wizard, and it'll ask me a bunch of questions and help me set up the new model. This is something that's existed on the color screen radios for a long time. It also existed, I swear it also existed on the black and white screen radios, and maybe it still does, but as far as I can tell, is it on the Boxer? Am I wrong? Let me double check. On the Boxer, if I had to guess where it was going to be, I would long press the sys key, and I would scroll down and look for, yes, Wizard Loader. It is there. So it is on the black and white screen as a script. It's not accessed from the model setup screen, but you'll see here if I choose the Wizard Loader tool, we get the same thing. Plane. Has it got an engine? You see it's asking the same questions and going through the same setup. So black and white screen folks, hope that you were watching and saw that. I hope you're learning a lot in this video series. If you are, would you please consider joining my Patreon? Patreon is a website where you subscribe to me. The minimum entry fee is $2 a month, and you get some rewards like getting access to my Discord server, but mostly what you get is a good feeling that you're giving something back. I make this content for free. I put it out there for free. I don't charge you anything. Don't put it behind a paywall. And I just hope that eventually you'll come to a point where you'll go, okay, I feel like giving something back. If today's that day, there's a link in the video description below to my Patreon. I'd love to have you as a supporter at whatever level you think is fair for the amount of value you get out of my content. If that's $2 a month, great. If it's $10 a month, even better. You subscribe at whatever level you feel like, and you can raise or lower or cancel whenever you feel like that's the right thing for you to do. Links in the video description below. Thank you so much. Now, there's one more trick that the color screen radio has up its sleeve, and this is, some people are going to be like, whatever, that's just cosmetic, I don't care, and some people are going to be absolutely drooling about it. If I single press the menu key to go to Model Setup, you see here we have the model name, we have the labels. We can access these things also from the model setup as well as from the model management screen. We have the option for a model image. There are no image files on the SD card. Crap. Well, I guess we better learn how to make image files and put them on the SD card. Real quick, I'm going to remind myself about the recommendations for the image format. And I'm going to go to the EdgeTX manual, which I told you about in the very first video in this series. Looks like skyraccoon.com has a large repository of free image files that can be used with EdgeTX. They recommend an image not exceed 192 by 144 pixels, and we need to see the images portion of the SD card section. Okay, great. Firmware images. Custom model or splash screen here. Model images is 156 by 92 for the model manager screen. If you want to use the model info widget, you may want to increase to 192 by 14, but don't go higher. And it should be a PNG file with a file name not exceeding 9 characters. Keep that all in mind, but I'm just going to go to this Sky Raccoon. Ooh! Ooh! Those are pretty. Can I just download all of them? Can I have them all? Can I have them all? No. All right, well, let's just grab a couple. Download. Wonder which of these is correct. I don't know. I don't have any of these radios. I am going to just guess that FreeSky Horus OpenTX is correct, because OpenTX and EdgeTX are almost the same thing, and the Horus was one of the first color touchscreen radios. Was it a touchscreen? I think it was, to support this feature. So let's guess that that's correct, and we'll do all suppliers and all aircraft types and all subtypes. Let's go! By the way, this is also how you get a custom zip file containing all the images. While that's happening, I'm going to plug in the top USB port on my radio, and I'm going to select USB storage to give me access to my SD card. Well, it was taking forever to gather up the zip file, so I canceled out of that, and I've just manually downloaded a couple files. I can confirm that the Horus files seem to have the correct dimensions, 192 by 114, and the file names also seem correct. 192 by 114, yeah, that matches exactly. So that's what you should download, the Horus files. If I then go to my downloads folder where I've got these files, I'm gonna just grab them and then I'm going to go to my SD card on my radio and put them in the images folder. And then if I unplug USB here, and we'll press the menu key to get to model setup and hit model image, sure enough, here are the images. I'm kind of disappointed that's not like an image picker. I just have to know the file name. Lame. Why do I not see the image? What if I go to model select? No picture. Why are they not working? Apparently there's another way to do it. Let's try that. The other way to do it is to long press the sys key and page to the SD card contents. There we go. We go into images and long press one of the image files. Yeah, it can read the file. It's showing that. That's working. Yeah, assign bitmap. That will assign that as the image file for this currently selected model. And the nice thing about that is that it seems to let you preview the image, so that would probably be my preferred way of doing it. Assign bitmap. Now, if I go back to the model setup, it doesn't show the preview. And if we go to model select, do we see it? Oh, now it worked. I wonder what the difference was. Maybe I needed to like back out and save it somehow. Well, I don't know why it didn't work the first time, but you can see now that I can not only name, but I can assign a beautiful image to each of the models. And if you have a whole bunch of different planes, that alone is going to be enough reason for you to have a separate model for every single one of your frickin' planes, so you can have a beautiful picture of the plane on your menu. At least it will be for some people. That's pretty freaking cool. These are the major features of model management on the color touchscreens radios, but there's a few more little housekeeping options that I want to show you. One of them is that we can tap this icon here to change the size and number of models displayed, including a text-based one and just a line-by-line one. So you can decide how you want that. In addition, if I long press on any of these labels, there's an option to rename the label, delete the label, and move the label up, but interestingly not move the label down. So your ability to sort of reorganize the labels on this list is a little bit limited. I also want you to know that you have the option to sort your models based on name, based on how often you use them. If you're thinking that it would be nice to manually do the layout, I'm not sure that's supported, although you could manipulate the names so that when they sort alphabetically, they appear in the order that you prefer, like with a little prefix or something. I also want to show you that if we long press the sys key to get to radio setup, there are a couple of radio setup options that relate to the model screen, and we skipped those earlier. Now is the time to go back and get them. So if we hit the Manage Models key, the first one is Model Quick Select. And I think a lot of people are going to enable this option. When Model Quick Select is off, and that's the default, if I go to the Model Select screen and I tap the model, the menu appears. Let me create another model real quick. So if I tap that second model one time, you see it just highlights it. Nothing really happened. And if I tap it a second time, it brings up the menu. But if I actually want to load that model, I have to bring up the menu and hit Select Model. If I enable the Model Quick Select option, if I go to the Model Select screen and I tap the model, it highlights it. And if I tap it again, it instantly loads it. Well, what if I want to get to that menu? Well, you guessed it. Then you long press and it brings up the menu. I think that's going to make a lot of sense for most people to just tap to load and long press to bring up the menu, but it's up to you, of course. Do you remember when I was surprised that you could select multiple labels and it would do and logic between them, like show me all my favorites that are also planes, and you had to manually deselect a label to deselect it? If you don't like that functionality and you just only ever want to select one label at a time, then change the label select option from multi-select to single select. And when we do that, then if I tap planes, then I get planes. And if I tap favorites, then I get favorites. And I can only select one at a time, and it just switches between them. The other thing I can do if I am going to use multi-select is I can change the matching from match all to match any. So the default behavior is that if I select two tags, planes and favorites, then it's going to show me everything that is a plane and also a favorite. But I can change this option to make the logic a logical or between them. So if I select planes and I select ground vehicles, then I get everything that is a plane or everything that is a ground vehicle. I'm going to see all of them together. That's up to you how you want to do that. Personally, I think I would just set it to single select, and I would select, I don't have that many freaking models, so I would just set it to single select. Now that you know about the model management features of EdgeTX, I want to encourage you to use this power responsibly. Sometimes people go off the deep end and they just make a new model for every single aircraft that they create. This makes problems because let's say that you set your aux modes up one way, you've got some cool special function for it, you've got all your models set up exactly how you want it, and now you get a new multi-rotor and you copy that model. And then you get a new multi-rotor and you copy that model, and then you make some changes. You figure out a new way to set up your models, and there's no way to propagate those changes back to your previous aircraft. Minimizing the number of models that you have means that when you make changes to your setup, it's less work to propagate those changes to other aircraft that you have. And if you're lucky, you'll make the changes in one model. It'll apply to all of that type of aircraft. And everything will be okay. On the other hand, if you have a lot of fixed-wing planes, ground vehicles, or other aircraft that have servos and mechanical actuators, you're probably going to need a new model for every single one of them, because at the very least, the output screen, where you set the endpoints and centers for your servos, is going to be different. But in addition, the channel layout for the control surfaces and so forth is also more likely to be different. In that case, you're going to have a lot of models, and you're going to get to play with all those model images, and that'll be kind of cool. There is a lot more for you to learn about EdgeTX, and I've got tutorials on, well, I'm not going to say all of it, but a lot of it, and they're all in this playlist. There's a card on screen, or if for some reason you can't see the card, there's a link in the video description below to the full playlist where you can learn as much as you could possibly want to learn about EdgeTX. I'll see you there.